So welcome to Inside the Lords. Quite a shocking inquiry report came out this week, and that was the Valdo Calocane inquiry about the absolutely tragic, brutal murder of 3 innocent people by somebody who was psychotic, mentally ill, as in Valdo Calocane. The reason why that's relevant to Inside the Lords this week is because it indicated a real problem with the way that mentally ill people are treated or helped or are not helped, and massive gaps in the system, just incompetence in some instances. And that relates to a debate that we're having about the mental health bill. And there's a speech below that I spoke on last week, where the mental health bill is about allegedly ensuring that the system improves. But one of the things I've learned from being a legislator is that you can pass a piece of legislation and then discover that it makes no difference whatsoever. So there's a very important part of this mental health bill that says that prisons should not be treated as places to dump the mentally ill, and I completely agree with that. It also says that there will be a 28-day transfer limit or target, so that you have to move people who are psychotic from a prison that's ill-equipped to deal with people with psychosis into a secure mental hospital. And I was basically just making the point that nobody believes that's going to happen. It just, you can say it doesn't make any difference. And that the problem with a lot of prisons is they're barely able to act as prisons, let alone as sort of substitute mental health facilities. A lot of people, of course, will say that Valdo Calocane actually needs to take responsibility and shouldn't be in a mental health facility because he should actually be in prison. That's a row that you can have, and I understand that. And there's an interesting piece by Ken McLaughlin, which I'll post a link to. But I think the main thing when you read that inquiry, the synopsis of it, is that the government really found it hard to reveal this information, and most of it is redacted, and the families are understandably furious. They feel as though 2 young students and, as people keep saying, a grandfather who was a very well respected member of the community, they just died and no one will say why. And you can't just say, oh, somebody had a psychotic episode. One of the interesting things that came out, by the way, hidden in the small print, was that because of previous discussions about mental health legislation, in which people who work in the mental health field were accused of racism because of a disproportionate number of black people being sectioned, that they didn't like to intervene because Victor Calocane is black. And so they didn't want to force him to take medication, which he really needed to do. And also he said he just didn't like needles and so on, you know, all of these ridiculous things. And that's why you have a mental health a piece of legislation that can actually ensure that people are forced, in some instances, very, very rare, forced, sectioned into mental health facilities to help them. Anyway, the whole thing just reminded me of the crisis of information. And another issue of the crisis of information where the public can't get told things, they're not told things, things are hidden from them, is obviously the issues around the Southport murder of the children and the subsequent trial that we've had. I wanted to raise why the Southport murderer was never, there was so much obfuscation, hiding of who he was at the time, and hold the government to account for that. You know, the fact that they wouldn't say it was an act of terror, they wouldn't give any information away. And I think that information vacuum caused the basis on which people speculated, jumped to wrong conclusions, fell for misinformation. That's all wrong, but if in fact you get into a situation where Keir Starmer and the government refuse to let the public know because they don't trust them, that if they know they won't go and riot, you actually create a situation which led to the riots, ironically, because people become so frustrated and feel left out. So I asked a question on that. Inevitably, the minister just ignored me and refused to answer, and just, as usual, kind of indulged in gaslighting. I was thinking about this lack of information in relation to all of the interviews I've heard recently about the Chagos Islands, which is that every time a Labour cabinet minister is interviewed on this, they say, we can't tell you because of national security. There's always a reason why they can't tell you something. And in fact, the deal on the Chagos Islands is entirely political. It's not to do with national security that they can't reveal information, but somehow it's always the public denied knowing more. So it's something I'm very concerned about. Just following on from my points though about Southport, and I think that there has been a genuine shift in the government's position now, which is, and not just them, but the CPS and the police forces. They are now beginning to acknowledge that maybe they should have acknowledged it was some kind of terrorism related event, and that there is a kind of increasing nervousness about how you deal with terrorism. And when I say nervousness, the public sphere has created a situation where the government can't just shut down debate. There has been sufficient backlash where people demand to know more. Why, if somebody was reported to Prevent so often for something, for carrying knives, for saying that they want to indulge in mass murder, why can't you intervene? What went wrong there? So I think that's positive that we're having that discussion. But one of the things that indicates why that discussion is limited is a new bill which I've been spending a lot of time on, which is the Terrorism Protection of Premises Bill, the most irrelevant piece of legislation that's ever going to be passed to protecting anyone from terrorism, let me tell you. I've already said in the past that what this will lead to is a new regulatory regime that will have an impact on both small and huge venues. Okay, you can understand potentially that they want a regulator to check that somewhere like the Manchester Arena or the Wembley Arena or these massive events have suitable security in place. But this is going to capture in its wake, this bill, places like village halls, church halls, small book festivals, mini events, anyone where you could potentially have 200 people. Is likely to create a whole range of bureaucratic paperwork and box ticking that you have to fill in. It's likely to bankrupt some organisations because it can be expensive for them. And in truth, when you look at all of the reports that have been done in the build-up to this bill coming through, there is no evidence whatsoever that this piece of legislation will save one life. But as an indication of what it's like having these debates, when some of us try to suggest that maybe the smaller venues should not be in scope, there's no evidence that it will work to have this regulation and security paraphernalia attached to somebody running a small, a small football club and having people round for drinks or whatever, and then suddenly, and the volunteers who are running that now have to go on training courses, present risk assessments and all the rest of it. They're just not going to bother. That's what's going to happen. There won't be Christmas markets. I made the point that, in fact, the terrorists would win if we completely altered the way we operated in order to keep everyone safe, when I wasn't even convinced this would keep people safe. It was a really horrible response from Toby Harris, who is Baron Harris of Haringey, and Lord Carlisle, one of the law lords, who basically accused those of us who were just probing at committee stage what should be done. And you're meant at committee stage to go through line by line a bill and scrutinise it and see if it's effective, see if it's fit for purpose, think about unintended consequences. When some of us raised that, both Lord Carlisle and Lord Harris particularly effectively said, well, you might feel happy to have a risk threshold higher than the general public, talking to a group of us. You might be happy if 199 people are killed by terrorists. You might not care whether you're risking life because you have some ideological commitment to taking risks or because you're opposed to regulation. But we are going to stop people dying through this bill. And of course, the government minister in charge nodded sagely. Yes, we are on the side of life. You are on the side of risking people's lives. And it was such a disgusting thing to say, because let's just be honest about something. We have a situation whereby the person who committed the Manchester Arena bombing, who actually has sparked this very piece of legislation, he was on the radar of the security forces. They knew about him, right? He didn't even go into the Manchester Arena. He was hanging around outside and nobody stopped him planting the bomb. The Southport murderer was practically offering himself up, told Childline he wanted to kill people, and Prevent had seen him for 3 times, and they didn't do anything. My argument is, you want to stop terrorism, is not driving mad small venues by sending them on training courses and checking everyone's bags and generally destroying public events and the civil society. But is that if you know somebody's a terrorist, arrest them before they arrive at the venue. The problem is not the venue. The problem is much deeper than that. And we've got to ask why. And just my final thing this week is on committee stage, as I say, it's when you go through a bill line by line. It's done slightly differently in the Commons, and they actually have committees in which they call on external witnesses, and then there's a limited number of MPs who go through things at committee stage. There has been a growing scandal about the committee stage of the assisted dying bill. I think this is something that you should keep your eye on. We will have a Substack on it. We will be coming back to this issue because it's become clear that the process has been completely corrupted. The witnesses that have been called are not, there is a disproportionate number of them who support the assisted suicide side of the arguments. There's a very limited number of MPs there who are more sceptical. Then the reporting back of what's been happening at committee has been one-sided and biased, I would say, from the Kim Ledbetter, whose bill it is, and has tried to present things in a particular way. But luckily, some people like Danny Kruger, who's one of the MPs in the committee, has posted films of what's happened, each single person who's spoken at committee. Nikki DaCosta, who used to work at the heart of Whitehall, has been totally brilliant at untangling the process for us. And the reason I'm saying that is because I want laws to be scrutinised if we're going to pass them, but we do have to not try and fool the public. Everything should be out in the open, everything should be in public, and we should be initiating a public debate. And I'm afraid when I hear supporters of the assisted dying bill accusing anyone who's sceptical about the particular provisions of this piece of legislation, which is what I am worried about, the particular provisions of the Terrorism Act, for example, knowing exactly line by line what is going to be required of people. When you say anything, when they then accuse you of being inhumane and heartless and wanting people to die a terrible, painful death in assisted dying, or wanting people to die in a terrorism attack and another, it's just a way of closing down debate. And what we should be doing as legislators is saying to the public, watch this space, watch the debates on the bills and laws that are being passed in your name in this country. Keep your eye on it and ensure that we have a debate beyond Westminster, where things are not done behind closed doors, where afterwards people go, oh my God, that law has got terrible consequences. So, more next week.